And now joining us on the Rothman Orthopedics guest line from NBC Sports Philadelphia, covering all things Eagles. If you're not following them, are you even an Eagles fan? And let's not forget, this holiday season is coming out with a reboot of the very famous movie Twins. This time it'll be Dave Zangaro and Myles Garrett, of course. Can't wait to see that movie with the family. Fine holiday fun. Dave, I say this to some people, but I really don't mean it. You have the best Twitter avatar in the history of Twitter avatars. I kid you not, my friend.
I've had some good ones. That one was funny. And so we were in Cleveland for those joint practices. And I was working on a story about Mailata, like getting a chance to go against Myles Garrett the second day, because Garrett wasn't there the first day. So we didn't have access to the Browns players, but I figured, well, I'll try to talk to them, because worst thing that happens is they kick me out. I'm already done here. I'll never have to deal with Browns PR again. So I kind of timed it so he'll be walking off the field at the same time as me, and I got a few, minute with him or so. I didn't know Reuben Frank had ducked around the corner to take that photo, but it's a good photo. It's funny. And I had another one a few years ago with Jordan Mailata, and it looks similar. It's just like a giant hulking person next to me.
No, it's a great photo. I used the same technique in high school with the girl I had a crush on. If I just if we left class at the same time, she might talk to me.
It's very similar, yeah.
Exactly. Totally different. But they both worked. Anyway, so let's talk about this watch. First off, I read the story you have on NBC Sports Philadelphia right now. I recommend everyone goes and checks it out regarding the messy divorce between Carson Wentz and the Philadelphia Eagles. Before we get into the X's and O's of it and how the Eagles will play, how Washington will play, when you look back on that moment in time, the Carson Wentz era, if you will, in Philadelphia, how do you remember it?
It still feels a little surreal, the whole thing, because he was supposed to be like the guy, right? He was supposed to go down as the greatest quarterback in team history. They identified this guy. They moved up from 13-2 to draft him. They said, this is our guy. This is going to be our guy for the next decade. And it worked. He was, in his second year, he was better than anyone ever expected. He plays a huge role. I still firmly believe they don't win a Super Bowl without the way he played that season. So then to see it a few years later just disintegrate the way it did, I think there are lessons there for everyone who was involved in that. I know Carson gets a ton of the blame, and look, he deserves some. I think the organization deserves some blame, and some of it was just bad luck, right? The injuries in general were bad luck, especially the concussion in 2019 in the playoffs. Because if he plays the rest of that game, they probably win it, or they at least have a good effort. Do they draft quarterback insurance in the second round? Do they risk? So it's kind of like this butterfly effect of one little thing changes, the whole trajectory of their franchise changes, and his career too. And it's, people think Carson is such a divisive figure, and he's not a bad dude. He's a good enough guy. I think he has some stubbornness in his personality. I don't think he ever connected to the entire locker room the way Nick Foles or Jalen Hurts did and still do. But all that would have gone away if he was able to just stay successful, stay on the field, and win games. And when that didn't happen, I think all those things kind of compounded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a fair assessment. And now we're very much in the Jalen Hurts era after two just wild games. The first one I would say was a little bit more wild. The second one I would say was just a lot better overall. I definitely think it was the best game I've seen him play as an Eagles quarterback. What say you after this Vikings game? Was that the best you've ever seen Jalen Hurts play?
100%. Yeah. In that game, he did things that I wasn't sure he could do. And some of the throws he made changed my outlook on his ceiling, to be honest. And we need to see him do it consistently. We need to see it week in and week out. And but some of those throws, man, were next level. And we all knew that he had to get better as a passer, right? It's I'm almost tired of saying it. I know people are tired of hearing it, but that was the truth. It was, he needed to improve in that area. And even in the first game, we saw evidence of that. But then in that second game, he blew me out of the water. I've gone back and watched that game a few times now. I can't get over some of the throws. And honestly, two of his best throws didn't count. The one that Dallas Goedert early on in that game, and then a little bit later, the ball where he's rolling left and throws it 35, 40 yards to Quez Watkins it was a holding call, so it didn't count. But those are two throws that, I've seen him make them in practice, but it's a lot different in a game where bullets are flying. He's got to be decisive. He's got to look to throw first off. Last year, he probably doesn't even throw that football to Quez. He probably tries to take off and pick up a first down, and that's okay. We saw in the first game a little bit, right? There were times where he would avoid traffic and break free and get a first down, and you think they can win like this, but what's the ceiling? What's the overall goal of your offense? This was a game where he can win throwing the football. The legs are still there, and it's still going to make him a really dangerous player, but the whole package is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Now, when you talk about that ceiling changing a little bit, are you seeing a guy that could make a couple Pro Bowls in his career? Are you seeing a guy that could get in the MVP conversation once or twice? What are you seeing as a ceiling right now for Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, I don't know where the ceiling is, which is what you want from a young quarterback who you might have to pay a ton of money to in this offseason. And we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's the fun part of this, right? Is
sure
we watch a game and we're overreacting to it, but that's what we have in front of us. He has top 10, top 5 potential if he continues on this trajectory. It's, we all thought he would get better. The team said it, he said it, because he's shown that. You go back to his first year at Alabama, he wasn't a very good passer at all, and he's gotten consistently better. That 1 year at Oklahoma was much better than we saw at Alabama. Rookie year was better than that year. Second year was better than that. And now all of a sudden, he's better again. The question was, how much better is he going to get? And is it going to come in a time frame in which the Eagles need it to? Because they're going to have a really tough decision that he might not make it a tough decision if he keeps going like this. But you were looking at it because I think at the beginning of last year, there was this thought that at the end of this year, we'll know. We'll just know whether or not he's the guy. He played 14 games, right? 15 games. He played 15 games. And we left that season going, well, I don't know. Maybe
right.
He is, maybe he isn't. And it wasn't as important last year. This year, it's very important because if he's the guy, you want to pay him. He wants to get paid, and you have to figure that out. So the best case scenario is he plays lights out, makes up the Eagles' mind for him. They pay him a ton of money, and he pans out. That's the absolute best case scenario, and I think that's on the table now.
Now, I want to switch gears, talk about the defense for a second here, and I know you were asking Jonathan Gannon about the cornerback play with Darius Slay, Avonte Maddox, and obviously James Bradbury, and trying to carry that over and what it does for a defense overall. And his answer that he gave you, I thought, was pretty fair in terms of it's everybody working together. It's the defensive line doing their job. It's guys winning their battles one-on-one up front, and then the cornerbacks obviously stepping up and being in the right place at the right time. When the Eagles got James Bradbury, they already had Avonte Maddox and Darius Slay. Did you think through 2 games they would already be at this level and kind of having that chemistry, knowing where each other is on the field and kind of having each other's backs, especially in a big game where you're playing against Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, it was very good. That's the best we've ever seen Slay play, and we've seen him play well in the 2 years he's been here. But overall, they're still getting C.J. Gardner-Johnson up to speed. He's learning a new position, and I know everyone downplayed that. That's showing up. There's a learning curve there, and he's not. So I don't think they've reached their potential yet, because I still think he's getting better and more comfortable at that position in the defense. So I think that'll come. Overall, though, I loved what they did on Monday night. And it's funny, you're right, Gannon answered my question about the secondary saying, well, yeah, the pass rush helps the secondary. It goes the other way too.
Yeah, right.
The secondary helps the pass rush. And my point to him, and he knows what the point was there, was that they played man coverage in that game quite a bit. They weren't playing 20 yards off the ball, and they didn't give the quarterback an out. Even against Jared Goff, they're talking about the pass rush, and I totally agree with them. They're tied together. And they were like, well, why didn't you get to the quarterback? And the answer is, well, Jared Goff got the ball out quickly. Mm-hmm. Well, why do you think he got the ball out quickly? Because you're giving him that out. It does work hand in hand. I really liked Gannon's aggressiveness in that game, and it was on a few different levels, and it's not just blitzing. Blitzing's part of it, but it's really just dictating the way you want to play defense and not letting the offense tell you that. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that, when you play certain offenses, you don't want to play some looser zones and be passive like that. That has a role, but I also think there's a point in time where you look at the personnel you have and it's pretty good. And you say, all right, well, we're going to be aggressive because we have the playmakers to dictate the way a football game is going to go. And they did that in this game, and it was refreshing to see. It was the most fun I've ever had watching a Jonathan Gannon defense.
Oh, I hope we see it again. And we're going to get to your second question. But real quick, to put a bow on that conversation, what? If you would have asked him about the defensive line or the guys up front, he would have answered by saying, well, the cornerbacks were pretty good too. I think he would have tried to tip his cap to each side, whatever side wasn't referenced. I think that's just what a coach would do in general. Let's talk about this Washington matchup here with the Commanders and Carson Wentz. Obviously, you mentioned Jared Goff getting the ball out fast, and he certainly did in week 1. Kirk Cousins had some struggles there against this Eagles defense. Carson Wentz has been known throughout his career here in Philadelphia, in Indianapolis, and so far to the point this year through 2 games with Washington, though he's racked up a lot of passing yards, still holds on to the ball pretty long. Do you think Jonathan Gannon and this defense plays a very similar aggressive game that they did against the Vikings? Do you think they'll do that same thing coming up here against Washington?
It makes sense to me. I mean, try to force him into some errors. If not, if you're going with a straight 4-man rush and you don't get there, then they have some pretty good weapons and he can buy some time and they can get open. No one's covering for 5 seconds, right? So, right. And even, the last couple of years going against Washington, it was stop Terry McLaurin and you eliminate their passing offense. And that's not the case right now. Curtis Samuel's playing really well. Jahan Dotson looks pretty good in his first game action. So they have other weapons that you have to worry about. And I feel pretty good about the Eagles secondary, but help those guys out a little bit. Call a blitz here and there. The nice thing is Washington doesn't really have much of a run game. So we'll see. You try to stop it if they start running the ball. But such a big goal for any defensive coordinator is to make a team really focus on one thing or the other, and Washington kind of does that on their own already. So this is a game where it makes sense to me to be aggressive and get after him, force Carson Wentz into errors that we know he'll make at times, and maybe he beats you, but I'd put that game on him.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm with you 100%. You mentioned the rushing offense of Washington. It's not really there, which is kind of against their MO from years past. But when you look at their rush defense, that seems to be non-existent as well. And I know they went up against a really good running back last week in DeAndre Swift, but their defense allowed 191 yards. Do you think this will be a game? And I know Miles Sanders has had 2 solid games to start the season. Do you think this will be a breakout year or breakout game for Miles Sanders?
Yeah, it could be. He didn't get to see them in the last game, or maybe both of the last games they played Washington. They ran all over him in those 2 games. They're giving up 7.5 yards a carry, which is crazy. Now, some big runs in there have certainly skewed it through just 2 games, but they're not a very good run defense right now. I think you can run on them. They have a couple of good defensive tackles up front, Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne, 2 Alabama kids, but you can run on this team. And it's funny, DeAndre Swift he killed the Eagles and he killed Washington too. Washington and Philadelphia are 1 and 2 in terms of yards per carry giving up this year. Washington's a 7.5. The Eagles are a 6.2. So DeAndre Swift has a big part in both of those, but you can run on this team. And I think the Eagles can control this game doing that. I don't think it's a game where you throw away the passing attack because they're going to go into every game this season thinking they can throw on the other team. But this can be a game where you run on them, and Dallas Goedert might have a big game too. He seems to really kill Washington. He had in the 2 games they played them last year, he had 13 catches, 206 yards. So
wow,
I think this could be a breakout game for Miles and possibly Dallas.
All right, well, I'll cross my fingers for that. Real quick, go back to the defense for a second here, talking about Jonathan Gannon. This was the answer he gave you about a possible carryover, and I believe this had to do with pressure. This is what Jonathan Gannon had to say in his press conference today to you, my friend.
Yeah, there's carryover to everything we do, as far as, calls. Like, we're not changing the menu week to week. We pick and choose from different buckets, but, we always set it up. The game plan's always set up with our people in mind versus their people, our scheme in mind versus their scheme, and then our scheme versus their people and our people versus their scheme. It won't change.
Now, that's not what I want to hear from the defensive coordinator, because being aggressive actually worked. And if it's working, I'd like to see it again. He's saying that we're going to match up to the personnel that we're playing against. Well, if you do something well, why not keep doing it?
Yeah, and look, I get his point. And there are some times where being aggressive can get you burnt. But sometimes, like I mentioned this earlier, like, you're allowed to dictate the way you want to play too. It doesn't have to always be so dependent and so reactionary against what you're facing, right? And there are plenty of reasons to play zone defense. I'm not saying he shouldn't abandon that. He shouldn't play off. They shouldn't do all these different things, because they have a lot in their menu, right? I'm not saying to eliminate it, but part of me looks at that game and thinks, well, you did this against a quarterback who's an average quarterback, right? And look at the quarterbacks they're facing this year. I know the offenses are different, but look at the quarterbacks. Just the next few weeks, right? Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, who is probably the best of those three. Cooper Rush, most likely after that. You're not seeing the Aaron Rodgers of the world. You see him later in the year. You're not seeing Pat Mahomes. You're not seeing Derek Carr. You're seeing quarterbacks that I feel like you can bully a little bit.
I hope so.
There's nothing wrong with dictating and being a bully. And I'm not saying it's just like, I think sometimes people think like, oh, blitz. I'm not saying that. I'm not. I think you time them up here and there, they can be effective, and we've seen that. But sometimes you have good corners too. Let them play man. Let them play press. Mix it up, but be the aggressor. That's all I want. And, it frustrated me last year to see his defense, not because they lost to good quarterbacks, but because they lost the same way to those quarterbacks. And it was like, maybe you are playing the best brand of football to give your team the best shot to win it. But wouldn't you try something else after a while when it's clearly not working? And that was my big qualm with him last year.
100%. Now, we referenced it earlier. This is the previous question that you asked him in the press conference. I want to make sure we get this in.
I was ready for it that time.
That one, I kind of telegraphed it, so I'm sorry. Let me see if I can get rid of this again. There we go. It's the stare down every time, Dave. It's the stare down that does it to me every single time. Before I let you go, I don't need your real full prediction. Are you feeling confident in this Eagles team pulling out a victory? Are you feeling that this is a win this weekend?
I am,
okay.
But I also think this isn't an easy game. You're coming on a short week. You're on the road. I know it's just a drive, but you're on the road, and you're playing a team that I don't think is bad. I think Washington, to me, is the second best team in this division. I think they have a more talented roster than Dallas. I know Dallas has a better quarterback when Dak is healthy, but and this is also a Washington team that came to Philly last year with Garrett Gilbert and gave him a decent game. So as awful as that game was. So I think the Eagles are going to win it. The line tells you that too. It's up to 6.5 the last time I checked. I think they'll win it. And I'll be honest though, before the Vikings game, I picked the Eagles against the Vikings. I had a feeling they were going to win that. In the back of my head, I was thinking about picking Washington this week, but then I saw what the Eagles did in Minnesota or against Minnesota, and I thought, well, no, I think they're just a clearly a better team than Washington. I'm going to pick the Eagles in this one.
My man, Dave Zangaro. Watch all things Dave Zangaro on NBC Sports Philadelphia. Also, the Eagle Eye podcast with our friend Ruben Frank. And like I said, coming to theaters this holiday season, the reboot of Twins with Dave Zangaro and Myles Garrett. Dave, you're the best, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. Everyone give Dave a follow on the old social media as well, and give a listen to Eagle Eye podcast. Dave, thanks so much, brother.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. The great Dave Zangaro joining us on the Rothman Orthopedics guest line.